Well, with me now, two Conservative MPs, Emma Nicholson, a former Vice-Chairman of the party, and Theresa Gorman, a member of the right-wing 92 group. Theresa, you watched that film report. How hard are you prepared to fight for Thatcherism now that Mrs Thatcher has gone?
Well, of course we must fight even stronger, since the leading exponent has been usurped. And I'm very, very sad about that. But John Major, Mrs Thatcher believes, particularly in the European field, will carry forward the views which she felt so strongly about and which were part of the division in the party. And I think that John Major will become increasingly known and popular in the next few days.
But so when so many MPs have said to Mrs Thatcher, go, or they fail to support her, aren't they saying that's enough Thatcherism?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that the divisions in the party were those members who were deeply concerned about the effect of community charge on their chances of being re-elected, and they put a great deal of pressure on, and the others were those who felt that Europe should be something closer to us, meaning a federated Europe, which is the view which is espoused by Michael Heseltine, and those like Mrs Thatcher who feel that we shouldn't surrender our sovereignty, which Mrs Thatcher felt we would be doing if we went as closely into a monetary union as Mr Heseltine proposed.
Well, let me turn to Emma Nicholson. I'm sure you'll say you want to build on what Mrs Thatcher has done, but have you had enough of Thatcherism?
I am a strong proponent of the free market, and I want a larger and better free market. But I know that we have to balance it with a warmer and more sensitive heart to the needs of others who have it very great difficulty in accommodating themselves to a really hard free market economy. So I want more free market, less state controls, but a broader breadth of warmth and care for the people who will always be at the bottom of the heap. And that's just the way life is made.
You see, you're a Heseltine convert, at least in recent days. Mrs Thatcher said that Mr Heseltine believed in everything that has pulled the party down in the past.
No, Mrs Thatcher got that wrong. In fact, if you look at Mrs Thatcher's track record, for one reason or another, we've become more of a corporate state under Mrs Thatcher than less of a corporate state in terms of state power and state expenditure. We've now gone past the ceiling of £200 billion. I most certainly want to cut down state influence and state expenditure. But I believe strongly that not a federated Europe, but a Europe along the lines that Douglas Hurd and Michael Heseltine support is the Europe to which we move. And that's why Mrs Thatcher distanced herself from her own foreign secretary.
Well, let me ask you briefly, Theresa, about Europe. There's no one now standing, it seems to me, for the leadership who really stands for Mrs Thatcher's view of Europe or her way of dealing with it.
Well, no, Mrs Thatcher's concern was that by handing over the control of currency to a central bank in Europe, we would no longer control our own economy, because those...
Do you think there's anyone now among the contenders who has that fear?
No, Mr Major embodies those views. He has rejected the idea of a centralised EQ. He believes we can have a parallel European money.
So you're
perhaps
hopeful?
We can. I'm very much in support of Mr Major now that Mrs Thatcher has gone, but of course she is irreplaceable.
Thank you both very much indeed. What will the entry of two new contestants do to Michael Heseltine's chances? In a 10 Downing Street statement, Mrs Thatcher said that it would be better if she stood down to enable cabinet colleagues to enter, clearly support for Hurd and Major. Denis Tuohy asked Heseltine campaign manager Michael Mates how he viewed this endorsement.
I think it was pretty clear she wasn't going to endorse him anyway. She said some fairly strong things about him last week when she was a candidate as well. The colleagues in the House of Commons have made their judgment.
Mr Heseltine spoke of Thatcher voters on the first ballot who have made it clear that they would vote for him on the second ballot. Now, is that likely to happen? Can that be relied upon now in the new situation?
I think so. Well, we've already had a number who have publicly declared that they voted for Mrs Thatcher on Tuesday, and they're voting for Michael next Tuesday. Dame Jill Knight for one, Jim Pawsey for another, David Evans, a third, and I could go on with a very long list of names. David Trippier, the deputy chairman of the party, has just said that he's supporting Michael Heseltine because Michael Heseltine can best unite the party after the ballot is over, and he is the only one who can win in the north.
How important is it for Mr Heseltine that he does win on Tuesday? If it goes to a third ballot, is it not more likely that the second preference votes, perhaps of Mr Hurd and Mr Major, may be each for the other?
We have no idea until we see what happens in the second ballot. But you've got to bear in mind that Michael had 152 votes, and he needs 187. That is another 27 votes required. And given that we've already had indication of several people who are coming to us from the Thatcher camp, I don't believe that we will need a third ballot.
What is the central policy issue now between Mr Heseltine and Mrs Hurd and Major?
You have heard his priorities as to the importance of the tasks ahead in the campaign last week. In particular, he believes we must have a thorough and comprehensive review of the poll tax, because that is what has done us more damage in the country than any other single issue. And we've got to get united, and we've got to win the election, because the ultimate disaster would be if, as a result of all this, Neil Kinnock was to get into Downing Street, and that's something we shall all equally want to avoid.
Well, here at Westminster, I have with me Sir Norman Fowler, former Cabinet Minister, Malcolm Rifkind, Secretary of State for Scotland, and Sir Geoffrey Johnson-Smith, Vice Chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee. Can I ask you all briefly first your feelings, your reactions to today's extraordinary events? Sir Norman.
Enormous sadness. I came into the shadow cabinet with Margaret Thatcher in 1975. I served with her in the cabinet from 1979 up to the beginning of this year. I think it's a terrible loss, and great loss for the nation, and above all my feeling today is personal sadness that she's gone.
Malcolm Rifkind?
Yes, I agree with Norman. Seeing Margaret in Cabinet this morning faced with the most difficult problem of her whole career, one could only be enormously impressed by her dignity, by her selfless courage in the national interest, and by the way in which she has comported herself throughout the day, and for what must have been an extraordinarily difficult ordeal for anyone. She is a most remarkable person.
Sir Geoffrey?
Me too, sadness, because I think she will go down in history as possibly the greatest living the greatest Prime Minister in peacetime that we've had, certainly in this century. But having said that, there was a sense of relief, and actually almost, I won't say joy at the end of it, but delight that she triumphed so well. One didn't want her to go, because there are many people who did want her to go. We have to face up to that reality, and one wanted her to go with dignity. She went with a triumphant flourish today.
Well, let's look ahead, now that she's gone, to the considerations that MPs will be thinking about and which may well influence their vote. We heard Mr Mate saying there that one of the factors is Mr Heseltine's apparent ability to carry the North, the marginals. Is he right in saying that that is a key issue? Presumably he is. And is he right in his feeling that Mr Heseltine is the man to do it?
Well, on the latter one, I don't know. I mean, that I started today voting and campaigning for Margaret Thatcher. That hasn't been possible. I don't intend to end today actually making some sort of statement upon my own position. But on the issue of the North and the Midlands, I think nothing is more crucial than that. If we're going to win the next election, we've got to carry the Midlands, the West Midlands, cities like Birmingham, cities like Nottingham. We've got to carry the North West. That is absolutely crucial.
Mr Rifkind.
Well, I think we're going to be doing two things. We're going to be choosing a Prime Minister, and we're going to be choosing a party leader. Crucial to both these requirements is someone who can unite the party, who can actually end the problems that we've experienced for the last few weeks. And I think it's going to be necessary, therefore, for someone who can actually be seen as acceptable to all points of view within the Conservative Party.
You said David Trippier was supporting him.
Mm-hmm.
David Trippier has had an experience of small business. He's been a small business minister. He comes from the North. I think it's an important statement he's made. Michael Heseltine has experience of the North. He did a very good thing, I think, as Minister of Environment in respect of Liverpool. So I think he will be a great help there.
What about the poll tax? Is that also not his strongest card? And Mr Rifkind, in Scotland, you know all about the poll tax and its woes, even better than most. Isn't this going to be something that could be a very useful card in defusing this very unpopular policy?
Well, it's got to sound credible. I mean, it's very easy to propose a fundamental review. That's a useful formula that doesn't commit you to actually anything at the end of the day. So I think these things would have to be spelt out. I mean, the government's position is really quite clear that there was a review a few months ago. A number of important changes were made. And naturally, we've said, as with any major tax, you continue to monitor it. It may be that other improvements, other changes may be required. But when people say they're going for a fundamental review, I'd like them to actually specify what they actually have in mind, rather than simply a safe but relatively meaningless formula of that kind.
I think the fact is that everyone's going to have a look. Whatever candidate wins, it's going to have a look again at the poll tax. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we all hoped that by this time this year, certainly by the time the local elections come around next year, the issue would have kind of gone quiet. It hasn't gone quiet. We need to recognise it hasn't gone quiet, and we need to look at it, and if it requires a fundamental review, method unspecified by me certainly, then I think that's what we've got to do. But I would have thought that frankly all the candidates are going to have to do that.
Right, but what about the issue of Europe, which in a sense was a catalyst for all of this? Now here is a situation where it would seem that the Thatcher view, and indeed perhaps the no turning back view, having heard what people would say on that too, doesn't have a voice in the cabinet. Not really, not in the same sense as it had, whoever wins the leadership. But it does have a voice within the party and within the country. Isn't it going to continue to be a divisive issue, the issue of Europe?
I don't think so at all. I think we're remarkably united, curious enough, behind the policy as adumbrated by the present Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd. And there is no real great division. Obviously there is extreme right, and there is, I won't say on the extreme left, but there are people like Teddy Taylor who have always expressed hostility, and there are those who are called the so-called Euro-fanatics. But the broad mass of the party, we're very happy the way in which our policy is being pursued by Douglas Hurd. I actually don't think it is going to be the crunch issue.
What do you think?
Oh, I think it's much more in these domestic matters.
Yes, I agree.
These are the questions to do with the poll tax. I think there has to be a fundamental review, and I think a new Prime Minister will be able to do that, unencumbered by the past.
I think there's going to be a view that this party, the sort of traditional party of one nation, must not get into a situation where its strength lies all in the south of England. We cannot afford remotely, and I speak as a Midlands member obviously, to have a party which all its strength is south of Watford. That would be disastrous from every conceivable point of view. So I think that you're going to find a lot of the debate which takes place is a debate about, if you like, north-south and the issues which are causing concern in the Midlands, industrial issues of that kind.
But everybody talks about uniting the party. One wonders how you're going to unite the party. There's so many people around the country watching this programme, watching the day's events, Conservative Association supporters, workers, who are appalled by what's happened, surely. They feel they've been cheated of the leader that they wanted, the leader that they elected. And those are the people you're going to have to galvanise and get out there come the election.
Yes, I think that's right, but I don't think that's going to be a difficult task. The Conservative Party has always united on the belief that a Conservative government is a crucial requirement of the national interest. Now, we're going to have a very lively few days until the new leader of the party is chosen. That leader will become Prime Minister, and I'm absolutely confident whoever is chosen will be someone whom the party will rally around, because the differences that have existed are differences of emphasis.
Yes,
there are differences of approach, there are differences of style. There's no fundamental difference of philosophy or outlook. Otherwise, we wouldn't all be in the same great Conservative and Unionist party.
I agree wholeheartedly with what Malcolm said. I mean, we're playing at the differences. People talk about the right wing and the left wing of the Tory party. We're amateurs as compared to the Labour Party. We've got great schisms. As for being cheated, I mean, I know from talking to members of my role as Vice Chairman of the Treasury Executive that they had deep concern reflected about the present Prime Minister. So it wasn't as though there were the great numbers of the Tory faithful who were united in terms of in terms of their attitude to the Prime Minister.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't actually necessarily agree with that. Right. I mean, certainly in my own constituency and the association in Sutton Coldfield or West Midlands constituency, I think was very united behind the Prime Minister. So I think that you're right to point out that there are going to be problems as far as this is all concerned. One way in which the problems can be resolved, and one step in this, is to make it absolutely clear that these three leaders are all members of a new administration under whoever we actually, whoever we have as the actual leader, that the three contenders all have a place around the cabinet.
And on that point, may I briefly ask you in turn who you are going to vote for in the second ballot?
Well, I made my position clear. I voted for Margaret Thatcher on the first. I would have voted for on the second. That's been taken away. The prospect of doing that, I will make my decision over the next few days.
Very briefly.
I will support Douglas Hurd. I think all the candidates have great ability, but I believe Douglas has the edge on authority and on experience.
Sir Geoffrey?
I shan't declare my position. It's a secret ballot, and I believe in my role as a Vice Chairman I ought to keep my counsel to myself, and I'd better listen to other people.
Gentlemen, thank you. We shall see how your votes and others add up in a few days. Thank you for joining us. Now back to Richard Lindley.
Denis Tuohy with Malcolm Rifkin, Sir Norman Fowler and Sir Geoffrey Johnson-Smith. Tonight the Thatcher era ends, not perhaps as the lady herself might have wished. Rather than risk going down fighting and drag her party with her, the longest-serving Prime Minister this century, more loved and loathed than any other, has only reluctantly decided to go. As her party chairman said this morning, "I do not believe we shall see her like again."